Oh,
Here
that's perfect, guys.
comes. No. Yeah.
Oh!
Grip, 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 grip.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have our new affix that is going to be with us for the next few months in Mythic Plus above level 10, and it is called Reaping. We saw some announcements about Reaping and what it was going to be, but now we finally get to play with it, which was worrying. I did say I was worried about this because this is going live in a couple of weeks, and as we know with Infest, there was a lot of problems with Infest that they didn't let us test properly. We had bugs going through the floor, we had Gahoonies going through the ceiling, they were able to aggro things on the wrong side of the instance, all kinds of issues, and Blizzard seemingly weren't letting us test the next one, and I was a little worried about it. But here it is, and thankfully, it does seem to be working as intended. A thumbs up, I didn't see any noticeable problems with Reaping whatsoever. So we're going to get into that. First of all, I want to cover some minor changes to Mythic Plus. Firstly, this is when the new gear comes out with the new raid. The item level of the whole game is going to go up. As such, they have done what they did in Legion, which is they have retroactively made Mythic Plus more difficult so that it doesn't scale uncontrollably. So if you add like 4 or 5 levels of the dungeon to what you're currently doing, that's what you're seeing. So the level 14 of Tal Dazar we're in right now, that equates more realistically on live to like an 18 or a 19. Similarly with the Motherload, if you just stick 4 or 5 levels on there, you'll see what's happening here. Now, I do want to give massive shout outs here to the guys who did this with me last night. This PTR right now, and we have raid testing this evening as I'm recording this, is so broken. I got some screenshots from the guys who couldn't see floors, couldn't see anything that was going on here. It was massively bugged, and overall, to get these 2 dungeons done with only about an hour of gameplay, it took us over 3 hours, and we didn't even start trying to do this until like after midnight. So we've been up a lot in the night trying to get these dungeons done for you guys to show off Reaping. So big shout outs to those guys and the guys on Twitter, because we had nobody online at that time of the night to get this done. So I put out a call on Twitter saying, look, we're on the PTR, we're going to be testing this out. Does anybody want to come in? So big shouts to the guys who came into this. So these are essentially pugs for the most part. One change to Mythic Plus I think most of you will be happy about is Bwansamdi is now present. This is it. So Infest is gone, Reaping is in, and Reaping is Bwansamdi is in your Mythic Plus dungeons. And when you kill trash, you will now see these spirits, these silver spirits that are lingering over the corpses of the enemies you've defeated. Every 20% of the total amount of required trash, so you know the bar that fills up to 100% to make sure you're not just skipping all the trash and killing the bosses, every 20%, so 20, 40, 60, 80, and 100%, Bwansamdi will reap those souls that you have killed, and all of those souls will charge at you no matter where you are in the dungeon and try to come and kill you. Now, the way this works is pretty simple. So for the first one, which will be at 20%, it's everything you've killed since the start of the dungeon. I do want to point out here, this includes neutral mobs that don't even give percentage, so you do have to be very aware of this, guys. If you just, like in Motherload, we tested this, so again, don't worry about the amount of deaths we had. We were testing lots of things to see how this worked properly. So if you, like in Motherload, there's a lot of neutral mobs that typically you would have AoE'd down during Infest Week. If you do that now, those will come back as reaped souls in order to come and kill you, despite the fact they gave you no percentage, and make that reaping, that reap, far more difficult than it needs to be. So definitely something to be aware of. Other questions that we were asked while we were in there, or that we were testing, is do they pull mobs that you may have skipped? Because skipping is a big part of Mythic Plus, especially if you're trying to route some sort of very efficient time. Seemingly not. They will run past anything that's not in combat and they won't ninja pull it. So in Tal Dazar, we tested whether they would run through the middle, where you usually have that patrol of dinosaurs, and they never pulled them at all. They just ran through them and they came straight for us. Are they duplicates of the mobs you killed? No, they're not. There are two types of mods. They will have the same models of the enemies you killed, but like a ghostly version. But in fact, they're either going to be melee mobs, which do a very simple melee, and that is the vast majority of the mobs you get. It seemingly is like 90% will be melee. And they do have the same models, but basically they just melee, they can be tanked, and they will stack a magical debuff on the tank, which does tremendous damage, but it can be dispelled. And I never saw more than 4, but 4 caster mobs come with them as well. Now, the caster mobs are slightly different. They will randomly target people in the party, which means if you're trying to manage line of sight, which I'll talk about later in order to group them up efficiently. If you have somebody who's not in line of sight, they'll attack that person. And they'll go for them. And they also stack the debuff that does a lot of damage. So interrupts and stuns are all very effective against these. So despite the fact that they look like the mobs you killed, they actually just fall into two categories. They don't have very much HP, and it's very fun. I want to be clear on this. This is really fun. This feels like going back to Legion. Infest, in any form, slowed down your Mythic Pluses. There's no doubt about it. You either had to CC them, or you had to DPS them down while the rest of the trash was staying at full health, then move on to the rest of the trash. Then you had to kill the Gahuni worms. None of that here. This is like a large, bursty AoE fest that you can have fun with. It's really quite nice. It's also very engaging, especially if you have killed a lot of small mobs, because that's obviously something you got to take into account. You might kill 60 mobs just to get to 20%. But you might do different mobs, which are slightly more dangerous and bigger mobs, that you only had to kill, say, 10 of those in order to get the 20%. In which case, the reaping that occurs on those mobs is only going to be very small. Whereas if you killed 60 easy mobs to get 20%, your reaping is going to be much more difficult. So that's something to bear in mind. What if you wipe to the reaping? It's a good question. So we tested this as well. If you die during reaping, the mobs will reset. They will run back to their corpses, and these ghostly apparitions that you haven't killed because they wiped you, they will linger around. What will happen then is they will come during the next reaping. So in a very simple process here, if you get to 20%, the reaping occurs and that wipes you, so like half the mobs run back to their corpses. At the 40% reaping, you will get all the mobs you killed between 20% and 40%, plus the ones that you did not kill between 0 and 20%. They will also join in. Some other facts here. What if you kill the last boss before finishing your trash percentage and then go back and kill the last bit of trash? So we tested this in Motherload. We skipped as much trash as possible to get to the last boss, at about 96% of the bar being full, so that would be 4% off the 100% reaping. Then we killed the last boss, and then we went back and killed the trash. That does cancel the final reaping. Now, you do not get the 100% reaping if you do that. So I agreed with the boys. They were a little disappointed at that because it feels like reaping is an intentional situation you are supposed to deal with in the timer. Obviously, killing the reaping wave that comes for you does take time, and that's something I think they want to build into there. But if they keep it like this, then it's hard to imagine many bosses or many Mythic Pluses where you won't try and intentionally not do the 100% reaping phase, because it's obviously far quicker to kill 1 or 2 mobs after the last boss and then not deal with the reaping at all. That's considerably quicker. So whether they want that to be intentional or not, I don't know. On top of them scaling up Mythic Plus, they have put in a new situation that you can do if your key depletes. So Buan Samdi is in the dungeon when you start. He's at the entrance in both of the dungeons we did. And he won't do anything. But if your key depletes, so you're halfway through the dungeon, it looks like you're not going to make it, the key's depleting, okay, fine. Buan Samdi will now offer you a deal. He will buff you. So with 20% damage, 20% health, so that you can blast the rest of the dungeon in a far simpler way. Because obviously the key's depleted. There's nothing else you can do here. So that's obviously to try and help people not just leave the dungeon, not just be like, ah, fuck this, I've had enough. Or what's the point in struggling to finish off this dungeon if we're finding it very hard? Some people will end up in a dungeon that is far more difficult than they intended. The keys run out of time. We've had a lot of deaths. Now the Buan Samdi will say, okay, that's fine. Obviously, there's nothing else that can change here. The key can't get any worse than it already is. Here's a buff to help you finish off the dungeon and smash through it, so you at least finish the dungeon, get your loot in an easier way. I think that's a wonderful addition to the game. Now, how is this managed? How is this fun? Well, this did add a lot of complexity. I don't want anybody to believe that reaping is simply you do some trash, then suddenly you AoE, you do some trash, and then suddenly you AoE. That's not how this works, because there are so many mobs. Right? On general, you're going to get something like 20 to 30 mobs depending on how well you did, on how much percentage each of those mobs get. Like I said, we chose Motherload because it was an obvious choice to work out how it worked with tiny mobs that give very low percentage, but there's a lot of them. So what happens here is you have to be really strategic about where you want your reaping to occur. So a great example here would have actually been a Tal Dazar. As we were coming down the stairs, we were faced with two choices. And remember, this is the equivalent of live of like an 18 or 19 dungeon. And I'm not the most seasoned healer by any means. Certainly not at this level of Mythic Plus. So we had in front of us a rather dangerous pack. And we were at 39%. That meant that once we killed one of these enemies, reaping was going to occur. And the likelihood is we're still going to have 3 very dangerous enemies still alive. That's probably going to be a wipe. So what's the choice here? Well, the DK had control of one of the mobs from the dungeon. So we thought about it. We're like, okay, I'll tell you what the best strategy is here is we'll come back up to a nice area. We'll release that mob, kill that one. That will give us the percentage to tick over into the next reaping. And then we can use this open area to deal with reaping, then go back down. And that's the thought process that's going in here. So it's not a mindless thing. I don't want anybody to believe that. This time around, what they're doing is, what is your percentage? What's the best course of action to trigger the reaping so we can deal with it effectively? Because it's coming whether you like it or not. And as I said earlier, should you be careless with your reaping and it causes you to wipe, your next reaping is going to be far more difficult. Now, another question people were asking was, does it resurrect everything each time you have a reaping? So some people believed, including myself, and when I read it, is that from 0 to 20% will be the easiest reaping, because that's the stuff you've killed from coming into the dungeon. But at 40%, does it resurrect everything you killed from 20 to 40%, plus everything from 0 to 20%, so it gets a stronger and more difficult reaping as you go on? That's not how it works. Once you deal with a mob that its soul has been reaped, that one's done. Don't worry about it. You'll never see it again. So ideally, you're going to deal with it in blocks. You're going to have the 0 to 20%. You're going to eradicate that. And then the 20 to 40% reaping, that is only going to be the mobs between 20 and 40. And then similar between 60 and 80, 80 and 100. That's how this works. So this is so much better. So much better. There is no denying it. And we did it on a relatively bad week because we had like Sanguine and things like that. I will point out that so far reaped souls don't appear to be affected by the affixes of the dungeon. So it doesn't appear like they can be bolstered, but we didn't test bolstering, but they don't drop Sanguine. I don't think it's going to be a case like early Temple of Sothralis, where the respawning low HP snakes were all just like buffing each other and doing all sorts of crazy things. It looks like they've taken that into account this time. Really, really nice, because it was fun, and it was something we needed to be aware of. That's what you want in engaging gameplay. Yes, this is a thing we're going to have to deal with, but it's also fun to do. Are any classes going to be overpowered with this? Because I was concerned certainly about things like Fire Mages being able to do massive burst AoE. What we can see so far is Blood DKs are obviously very powerful for this because they can mass grip them. And that's always good, right? If you're going to AoE a big bunch of mobs, being able to mass grip them is a big deal. Moonkins were also really strong here with the caster mobs. Being able to solar beam them down and keep them locked down together was really nice. Obviously, AoE stuns from the Shaman and Demon Hunter are going to be really good. They do have a reasonable amount of HP, at least at the levels we did, which indicates to me that it's not the case if you could blow these up in 2 seconds. Maybe you can if it's like just a level 10, something like that, but we did a 14 and a 12. That wasn't the case. They needed a decent chunk of AoE in order to get them down. One issue they might run into, but I think we tested it to the max, which would have been Motherload, is if you go out of your way to spawn more and more souls so that it kills your PC. I didn't run into that issue myself, and I would say Motherload is the likely candidate for the worst case scenario there. That did not happen in our runs. It wasn't a performance issue as we did that, but it is a pretty extreme amount of AoE if you do pull out a lot of mobs, so be aware of that. But it doesn't seemingly look like certain classes are going to be far more like beneficial, at least not unless you're going for the extreme high end. I would say this maybe has a little bit of a knock to the rogues though. Skipping and stuff is going to require a little bit of changing because, as I said, it's better to deal with reaping with less reaped souls than it is to have lots and lots and lots of them, depending on your group composition. So skipping and cloaking might not be as effective, but I don't know. I think it's a very minor change. I don't think any class is really going to struggle here. If you've got some form of AoE, it's going to be effective here. Burst AoE, of course, is always nice as it is in Mythic Plus, but they do have a reasonable amount of HP, so it's not a case of one guy just blowing them all up in 1 second and calling it done. Overall, vast improvement. Vast improvement to Mythic Plus. Far more fun, far more engaging. Was looking forward to the reaping. Was I ever looking forward to a single infested mob? No. No, I wasn't. But this time around, I was looking forward to the Reaping. So enjoy Blansamdi's deal. This will be live in a couple of weeks when the new raid comes out. I think this might be a much better period of time for Mythic Plus, honestly. So big thumbs up from me. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you again. Bye-bye.